A legendary Iowa coach just put words to what the Caitlin Clark years actually felt like. And it wasn't the clean highlight reel version fans remember. She described it like trying to steer a rocket ship while the whole world argues about where it should land. Every game became an event. Every road trip felt louder than the last. And the strangest part, the biggest moments weren't always the ones on TV. Lisa Bluder had a front row seat for Clark's record-breaking career. And when she finally opened up about what it was really like, the answer was not what anyone expected. She didn't describe coaching a star. She described coaching a person inside a storm, managing energy, protecting confidence, keeping the locker room steady, and still asking for greatness every single night. Because here's what most people missed. Iowa wasn't just playing basketball. They were navigating a media phenomenon in real time. And the emotional part wasn't about winning. It was about how fragile everything can feel when you're living in a season that the world treats like a movement. If you believe the story behind the story matters, smash that like button. It tells us we're on the right track. Because what Lisa Bluder just revealed changes how we understand those 4 years at Iowa. And honestly, it changes how we should look at what Caitlin Clark is doing right now in the WNBA. Let's filter out the noise and connect the dots. When Bluder was asked about staying in touch with Clark, she said something revealing. She mentioned she still talks to Caitlin quite often, follows all her successes, and always wants to be in her camp. Standard coach talk, right? But then she went deeper. She said her admiration isn't just about what Clark accomplished, it's about what she's handled in her young 24 years. That wording matters. Handled. Not achieved, not won. Handled. Because what Bluder witnessed wasn't just basketball excellence. It was a young athlete carrying a level of scrutiny and pressure that most players never touch in an entire career. The kind that looks glamorous from the outside but comes with a non-stop demand to be perfect, to be available, to be the story every single time. Many of you have been saying this for weeks. You've noticed how Clark operates differently than other stars. How she elevates teammates instead of isolating them. How she stays grounded despite the chaos. And you were onto something. Because that foundation wasn't built overnight. It was shaped during those Iowa years when the spotlight turned nuclear and Bluder had to figure out how to develop a player while the entire sports ecosystem turned her into a daily topic. Reading between the lines of what Bluder said, you start to realize what made this coaching job different. On a normal team, a coach can experiment. You can let a player struggle through a stretch. You can take a lesson from a bad week and keep it in-house. With Clark, nothing stayed in-house. Every possession had an audience, every miss became a clip, every adjustment was treated like a referendum on the program. Think about what that means practically. Bluder had to create answers in real time, not just plays but counters. Not just counters, but emotional steadiness. Because when your entire identity runs through one player, an off night isn't a minor inconvenience. It changes the air in the building. It changes the confidence of everyone else. It changes the margin for error. Clark wasn't a piece of the offense. She was the engine. And when the engine sputters, even briefly, everything feels louder, tighter, and harder. That's what people miss when they talk about records and sellouts. Behind the spectacle, there was a coach trying to keep the machine balanced while the world waited to judge every single result. Here's where it gets interesting. Bluder mentioned that the weight Clark carried before tip-off was palpable. The building could feel tense even in warm-ups. One bad stretch would turn into a week of noise, not just from opponents, but from expectations, from the constant spotlight, from people deciding what Iowa should be and what Clark should be, and what the story was supposed to look like. You're starting to see the pattern. This wasn't about X's and O's. This was about managing a cultural phenomenon while still trying to coach basketball. Every opponent built their night around making Clark uncomfortable. Different coverages, traps, face guarding, 2 defenders shading her before she even crossed half court. Sometimes the goal wasn't to guard her in the traditional sense, it was to wear her down, to drain her patience, to test how long she could carry the offense without forcing something. And Bluder had to navigate all of that while keeping Clark coachable, while keeping her confident, while keeping the rest of the team connected instead of letting the attention create division. That's the part that gets overlooked. The tactical chess match was only half the job. The other half was protecting Clark's mental space and making sure the program didn't implode under the pressure. What's fascinating is how Bluder frames their current relationship. She said it in a way that suggested they survived something together, and they did. Those seasons weren't normal seasons. They were a national spectacle. Every media cycle tried to reframe what Clark meant. Every big game carried a storyline heavier than the scoreboard. To navigate that without the relationship cracking says everything about the trust they built behind the scenes. Connecting the dots reveals something most fans don't see. When you hear how Aaliyah Boston talks about Clark now in Indiana, how she describes the way Caitlin keeps her involved, keeps her confident, keeps her empowered on the floor, that's not random. That leadership style, that ability to uplift teammates instead of overshadowing them, that was developed during years of being coached through the storm. Boston said something powerful recently. She mentioned that when they meet up before games, Clark tells her, "You're going to be amazing because you are amazing." And Boston said, "It's that confidence Caitlin continues to make her feel. That's the through line." The records were loud, the spotlight was louder, but the most durable part of the story might be the bond that formed inside the noise and the way it still shows up in the people around Clark today. So here's the question we need to ask. Do you give more credit to the coach who built the environment, made the adjustments, and kept the team grounded through the chaos? Or do you believe Caitlin Clark was inevitable with or without the system around her? Because what Bluder is quietly saying is that it was both. Clark had the talent, no question. But talent alone doesn't survive that level of pressure without fracturing. Someone had to create the structure. Someone had to absorb the external noise so Clark could focus on basketball. Someone had to say, "I believe in you," while also saying, "Here's where you can grow," without turning it into criticism. That takes a relationship built on honesty, not just success, and the fact that their connection lasted beyond the 4-year pressure cooker tells you something profound. Let me know in the comments. Who deserves more credit for those Iowa years? Drop your take below because this debate is heating up across the WNBA community, and I want to hear where you stand. Most college coach-player relationships fade once the season ends. Not because they were fake, but because the structure disappears. Schedules change, life moves on, and the link becomes a memory. Here, it clearly turned into something more permanent. That usually only happens when both sides feel like they survived something together. And when you look at the timeline, you realize just how intense it was. In 4 seasons, Caitlin Clark went from an exciting freshman to a global headline. The numbers climbed into territory that used to feel untouchable. The crowds got bigger, the cameras multiplied, and the sports center of gravity started leaning toward whatever gym Iowa was walking into that week. It resembled those old eras when one program dominated the conversation, except this time it was being driven by one player's pull, and Bluder was managing all of it. Not just the basketball, but the psychology, the constant evaluation from media, the praise that could turn into backlash overnight, the strange pressure of being treated like a symbol instead of a player. What made Bluder's recent comments land so hard is that they weren't drenched in sentiment. No dramatic speeches, no big emotional performance, just a calm acknowledgement of what it actually required. And sometimes the most meaningful praise is the kind that comes without decoration, because it sounds like someone describing a reality they lived through, not a story they're trying to sell. That restraint says everything. It hints at how complicated that partnership really was. Because coaching Clark wasn't only about empowering talent, it was about managing weight, pressure from the outside, expectations from the inside, the constant demand to be brilliant while remaining stable, while remaining coachable, while still being a young person growing up in public. Here's what the critics will always say: no championship. Iowa made it to the national title game twice with Clark, and both times they came up short. That's the easy argument because it's the simplest measuring stick. But the story is bigger than that, and Bluder knows it. The program reached heights it had never touched. The sport moved because that era happened. Clark left Iowa not only as a record breaker, but as a player hardened by the most intense spotlight the women's college game has ever seen. She learned how to lead through noise, how to respond to nights where the world decided she was either a hero or a problem, how to bring teammates with her instead of letting the attention isolate her. That didn't come from highlights. That came from years of being coached inside a storm. And you can see the proof of it now in Indiana. Watch how Clark operates with the fever. Watch how she keeps Boston engaged, how she makes Kelsey Mitchell better, how she's turned a struggling franchise into a playoff contender. That foundation was built at Iowa. Many of you have pointed this out. You've noticed how different Clark's leadership style is compared to other stars. She doesn't hoard the spotlight. She doesn't play the diva. She elevates. And that's not an accident. That's the result of being coached by someone who understood that talent without character creates chaos, and Bluder made sure Clark developed both. We're getting into territory that the media won't touch, but sources close to the Iowa program have whispered about just how deliberate Bluder was in protecting Clark's growth. Not just her skill development, but her emotional resilience. There were moments, especially during Clark's sophomore and junior years, where the pressure nearly became too much. The expectations were suffocating. The criticism was relentless. If these reports are accurate, Bluder created a buffer. She absorbed some of that external noise so it didn't crush Clark's confidence. She had difficult conversations about handling failure, about dealing with unfair narratives, about staying grounded when everyone wants to either worship you or tear you down. That's not traditional coaching. That's mentorship at the highest level. And here's the part that connects everything. When Bluder said she has so much admiration for what Clark has handled, she wasn't talking about basketball achievements. She was talking about navigating a cultural moment without losing yourself. Because that's what Clark did. She became the face of women's college basketball, carried impossible expectations, dealt with criticism that would break most people, and still came out the other side capable of leading, uplifting, and connecting. That's Bluder's real legacy. Not a championship banner, a blueprint. A coach who helped guide a phenomenon without letting it become a circus that destroyed the player. A player who changed the sport without losing the ability to connect, uplift, and lead the people around her. That bond is rare, and you don't understand it until you hear how quietly they talk about it now, like they're still processing how intense it really was. So if you're still trying to reduce this era to one missing championship, you're missing the point. The ring would have been the cherry on top, but the shift already happened. The sport already moved. The standard already changed. And the relationship between coach and player survived something that breaks most people. What we're seeing now in the WNBA, the way Clark is transforming Indiana, the way she's changing the league's entire dynamic, that's not happening in a vacuum. That's the result of being coached through the storm, instead of just being thrown into it and expected to figure it out alone. If you want more breakdowns like this, the behind-the-scenes angles, the stuff the highlight reels never explain, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we're diving deeper into every angle the mainstream won't cover. Next video, we're breaking down what's really happening behind closed doors with the Fever's playoff push and why some veterans are quietly concerned about what comes next. This is where the story lands. Lisa Bluder coached the defining women's college basketball figure of this era. She helped guide a career that shifted attention, changed arenas, changed television conversations, and changed what people assume is possible in the women's game. That's the kind of imprint a coach carries forever, regardless of what one trophy case does or doesn't contain. And when she speaks about Clark with that kind of quiet respect, it doesn't minimize the moment. It confirms it. It tells you she knows exactly what they went through, exactly what it cost, and exactly why it mattered. Stay locked in. We've got every angle covered